Afternoon class. Today's lesson is going to be about germination and growth in plants. Okay, so here's a overview of the lesson. You can find all this information on page 190 inside your textbook. Like I said, we'll be talking about germination, conditions for germination, and growth and development inside plants. All right, so let's get started. First thing I'll talk about is the basic parts of the seed. You have the seed coat, also called the tester. You have the helium. This is where the ovule, I guess, would have been attached to the ovary inside of a flower. So the helium is basically a scar that's left behind from the seed or the ovule being attached to the original ovary. All right, next we have the micropyle, which I would have talked about in the last video. It's a tiny opening uh, where the pollen tube would have entered the ovule. Okay, so this would have been before it was a seed. Uh, when fertilization would have occurred. All right, and also this is where water is going to actually enter inside of the seed. Okay, because the seed is basically it has a very low water content. And in order for germination to start, there's going to have to be some type of water that it's going to get inside the seed to basically soak the seed and basically start that germination process. The water is going to activate enzymes and it's going to help it with, different things inside the seed as it starts to grow. All right, so that's the outside of the seed. Next, you have the cotyledons and you have the radicle. Uh, and you are also gonna have the plumule. The plumule is basically between the cotyledons. If you're talking about a dicotyledon seed, okay. So the plumule or the young shoot is basically going to be in between the two cotyledons, and the reason why that happens is so that the cotyledons will basically protect the plumule, okay. Because if anything was to happen to the plumule or the radicle, then this plant will not be able to germinate. So that's why it's between the seeds to basically give it extra protection. And with the radicle, the reason why it's exposed is because the radicle is going to be the first thing that starts to grow when the seed starts to germinate. Okay, so once the seed has all of the suitable conditions that it needs, the radicle will start to grow down, as a root, and that's going to basically grow into the soil and try to set up some type of uh, foundation, or it's going to try to anchor the plant into the soil as well as absorb water and minerals. Okay, so let's talk about the function of each of these parts of the seed. With the cotyledon, in the case of a dicot, or the endosperm in the case of a monocotyledon, these two structures are going to store food for the embryonic plant, or the radicle and the plumule. Okay, so they're going to store food so that this food can later be used to provide energy once the shoots or roots would have started growing. Because growth is a process that requires energy in order for it to occur. All right, next we have the embryo. Like I said, that's the radicle and the plumule. We already know what both of them do. The testa, which I said was the seed coat, is a hard outer layer that's going to protect the embryo and the cotyledon. And the micropyle, which I said was an opening in the seed, which is going to allow water to enter the seed. Now, here's a definition of germination. Germination is the development of a seed into a seedling. Okay, so while this process, begins, the first thing that's going to happen is that this root or the radicle is going to grow down into the soil. Like I said, it's basically doing that to basically set up some type of foundation or some type of anchorage to basically support the weight of the seed or the seedling as it starts to grow. So this root is going to grow down into the soil, and from that you will have a bunch of different uh, rootlets or smaller roots that are going to branch off from the main root, and that's going to anchor the seed or the plant into the soil. So the first step is that the radicle is going to come out. Okay, that's what's being shown, in this portion right here. The radicle emerges. Like I said, the root hairs are going to grow from the radicle, and that's basically going to help with absorbing water, absorbing minerals, as well as setting up a foundation. So as the root continues to grow downward, the second thing that's going to happen is that this region here is called the hypocaudal. Okay, so this is basically a part of the stem. It's growing to grow in this arched, uh, I guess, shape right here. That's why it says it elbows out of the soil. The reason why that's important is because this arch is basically going to help to protect the plumule and the cotyledons, okay? Because it's a lot less damaging for the shoot to grow this way. If it grows in a bent shape, then as it gets taller, that's going to basically pull the seed out of the soil, as opposed to it growing vertically, where basically the plumule and the cotyledon will just be growing up vertically out of the soil is going to damage the leaves if the shoot were to just grow up straight in a straight direction. Okay, so all of these leaves would be damaged if it was to just grow up straight. But in order to avoid that, the hypocaudal is going to arch itself or to bend itself, and that's going to protect the seed and the leaves, as it gets taller. Okay, so as it gets taller, the plumule will basically be in the downward position, and that's going to protect the leaves. Okay, so the next step is that the hypocaudal is going to continue to get a little bit longer. The plant is growing, and eventually the plant is going to assume a upright position, and the leaves are now going to be developed to the point where they can do photosynthesis. Okay, so once it reaches that point, it is now officially a seedling, and this plant can now fully support itself. It has a strong root system, so the roots can get water and minerals, and the leaves to the top now can do photosynthesis. Now, during the process of this entire, uh, I guess, occurrence, remember I said that the cotyledon supplies this growing seedling with food. Okay, so inside the cotyledon or inside the seed, there's stored starch. Okay, the cotyledon is going to store this starch, and the seed is going to do respiration. Okay, respiration, release of energy from food. So that's how this plant is basically going to get all of the energy it needs in order to grow and to get larger. Okay, so that's why these cotyledons are, important. They're basically supplying this entire process with the energy it needs to take place. So once it gets to the point where the plant is now officially a seedling and the leaves can do photosynthesis, these cotyledons will now fall off because they are no longer needed. And as this process is also occurring, you'll find that the cotyledon is starting to shrink. The reason why it's shrinking is because all of the stored starch is being used up. And this happens to the point where, like I said, the plant can now support itself, so the cotyledons will just shrivel off and fall to the soil. All right, so here's I guess, a summary of what we have talked about so far as it comes to germination. All right, so as long as the seed is in an environment that has sufficient water, oxygen, and suitable temperature, then germination will occur. Okay, so the steps are as follows. Okay, so the first step is that the water is going to enter the seed through the micropyle. Remember, that's a tiny, opening that's inside the seed. That is going to activate the enzymes, and the embryonic plants, or the plumule and the radicle, is going to start to grow. Now, the first thing that is going to emerge out of the seed is going to be the radicle, and that's going to grow down into the soil. The next step is that the roots will basically develop themselves. They'll spread out, and basically it's going to supply the seed with even more water. Okay, the region above the root is called the hypocaudal, like I said. As it grows, it arches out and lifts the cotyledon and the shoot out of the soil. Okay, and at this point, the tester would also, fall to the ground, which is basically just this seed coat right here. Okay, and you all know what happens after that point. The shoot is going to straighten out. The leaves are going to be fully developed, and now we'll be able to do photosynthesis. Okay, and the cotyledons, which would have been used up at this point, will drop to the ground, and the plant will start to, support itself. All right, now let's focus on the conditions for germination. Uh, there are three conditions needed for germination. You have water slash moisture, so the soil is gonna have to be a little bit moist. You're also going to need oxygen. You're going to need oxygen so that respiration can take place. And you also need a suitable temperature range between 5 degrees Celsius and 40 degrees Celsius. Now, the reason why you need that range is because this is the range that enzymes will be able to be active. All right, so let's talk about enzyme activity first. All right. Seeds have a combination of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates inside of them. Okay. If you look at the nutrition label of anything that has, beans inside of it, like if it's a can of beans, for example, you'll always see proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. The reason why these are stored inside the seed is because uh, they basically help to supply the embryo with nutrients. Okay. We all know protein is something that you need in order for growth to happen. Okay, fats, that's an energy source, as well as carbohydrates. Okay, all right. So as it comes to enzymes, okay, the same way how enzymes, help us to break down food inside our body when we're eating food, these enzymes are also going to help to break down these proteins and fats and carbohydrates inside of these seeds to basically break them into more simpler substances that are going to be soluble so that the seed will now be able to use that. Okay, so the same way how whenever we eat something that has starch inside of it, our body's going to break down that starch into different pieces of glucose. The same thing is happening inside of seeds with the enzymes that are inside the seeds. So this is why it's very important for the seed to have a temperature range of 5 degrees Celsius to 40 degrees Celsius so that these enzymes inside of the seeds can function. Okay, and this part right here is just showing the different types of, or the different types of enzymes. You have proteases, which break down protein. You have carbohydrases, which breaks down carbohydrates. You have lipases, which breaks down fat. Like I said, carbohydrates, fats used for energy. Protein, that's going to be broken down into amino acids. Protein is something you need in order for growth to take place. So the same way how protein repairs and maintains cells inside of our body, the same thing is going to happen inside the embryo as it's growing. It's using that protein to basically help to create new cells, repair itself, and to maintain whatever cells are there. But more specifically, it is using this protein to help it to grow. Protein is one of those nutrients that you always are going to need in order to grow. All right, so with this slide here, this just brings home the point with the starch that you would find inside our food. Like I said, the same way how we eat starch inside our food and our enzymes break down the starch to make glucose so that our bodies can do respiration. The same thing is going to happen inside these seeds once they germinate. Now, the reason why water is needed is because water is going to help to activate these enzymes. Okay, in order for enzymes to function properly, they're going to need access to water. One of the reasons why that uh, is needed is because one of the ways that enzymes work is through during hydrolysis, which is when an enzyme is going to basically split a large molecule, such as starch, for example, by using water. Okay, so in other words, enzymes need water in order to function. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why these seeds are going to need water while it's doing germination. Another reason why water is important is because it is a universal solvent. Okay, all right. Okay, so water is a universal solvent. All right, remember there's starch stored inside the cotyledon, but once this starch is broken down by the enzyme, it's that the sugar that's created or the glucose that's created, it still needs some type of liquid to basically dissolve itself in so that it can travel, towards the embryo. Okay, so as these seeds are germinating, it also has vascular tissue such as the xylem and the phloem. Remember, the xylem helps to travel water, carry water, and the phloem helps to carry cytoplasm or sap. Okay, so that's why you're going to need water to be able to have this type of fluid that's flowing through this vascular tissue so that the sugar that's stored inside the cotyledons can, be delivered to the embryo wherever needed. Okay, so water is going to help to facilitate that. Okay, so whatever food was stored inside of the starch, you're going to need water so that once that starch is broken down into sugar, it has some means of traveling to the roots and the shoots where they're needed for respiration to take place. All right, and like I said, with oxygen, well, this one should be the easier one for you guys to remember. Oxygen is going to be needed so that aerobic respiration can take place. Once that happens, it's going to release energy from the glucose that would have been broken down from the starch as a result of the enzyme. So you're going to need oxygen to be available so that all of these different processes can occur smoothly. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the growth that takes place in plants. I'll start off with a definition. Growth is the permanent increase in the number of cells, or you could say the size of an organism. And growth is also the increase in complexity of an organism. Okay, so with the first point, that's just saying, when something grows, obviously it's going to get larger. And the reason why that organism is going to get larger is because uh, a lot of cell division is basically taking place. And as you increase in number of cells inside of an organism, that organism is going to get bigger. Now, growth can also be the increasing complexity of an organism. So this basically refers to how an organism is basically going to change or become a little bit more complex as growth is occurring. So for example, uh, with an embryo, for example, or a baby, over the course of 9 months, that baby is going to start off, I guess, as one cell or a zygote. And then as time passes on, it becomes more complex. Eventually, it's going to get a nervous system, it's going to have a circulatory system, etc. And it's going to get larger and larger and more complex as time passes on. So that is another, I guess, explanation of what growth is. So growth is both of these two things happening at the same time, increasing in size as well as increasing in complexity. Okay, so this little clip here is just basically showing how growth is going to look at the molecular level. This right here is cell division. Okay, so you start off with maybe 4 cells and these cells continue to split. That's going to increase the number of cells and thus the size of this organism as a whole, okay? All right, so when it comes to plant growth, the two main types of ways that you can, I guess, characterize the growth of a plant. One, this plant can get taller, and also the plant can increase its girth or its width, so it can grow across. For example, if you have a tree with a very thick trunk, for example, that means the tree is growing wider or the circumference is increasing. Okay, and in addition to that, this would just be the example of, the plant increasing in size. Remember, I also said that the plant can get taller, and also the plant can increase its girth or its width, so it can grow across. For example, if you have a tree with a very thick trunk, for example, that means the tree is growing wider or the circumference is increasing. Okay, and in addition to that, this would just be the example of, the plant increasing in size. Remember, I also said that these plants are going to increase in complexity as well. So whenever it comes to growing, certain types of specialized cells, like the palisade cell, or when it comes to growing vascular tissues such as the xylem and phloem, that's an example of it increasing in complexity. So it's increasing in size and it's increasing in complexity. Now, where does growth occur inside plants? Growth occurs in the meristematic regions of a plant, okay? So what is a meristem? Meristematic, meristem, they're the same thing. But a meristem is a region where plant growth occurs by active cell division. Okay, so remember the same clip here with the meristem. This is gonna, I guess, be a certain region of the plant, such as the shoot of, well, the tip of the shoot of a plant and the tip of the roots, where you're gonna have active cell division. So these special regions, that's where you have cells increasing in number or complexity. Okay, so you also have different types of meristem. The first one we're going to talk about is called the primary. The first one we're going to talk about is called the primary meristem. Okay, so with the primary meristem, you're going to find these at the tips of roots and shoots. Okay, so they're going to be responsible for the lengthening of these regions. Or in other words, it's going to cause these regions to become longer in the case of a root, or it's going to cause the shoot to become taller. Okay, so this is the meristem region right here. Remember we said the meristem, these are special regions where growth is going to take place inside of plants. So this is going to help the shoots here to basically get taller and taller, okay? All right, so the primary meristems is responsible for the tall growth or the height of trees or plants as a result of the apical, the apical meristem, or you can say the primary meristem. All right, so when it comes to the apical meristem, which is a type of primary meristem, you're gonna find 3 different zones where different kinds of growth is going to take place, okay? This is basically just a breakdown of what we mean when we say growth inside a plant. Okay, so in these different regions of the apical meristem, you're gonna have cell division, okay? You're gonna have a zone of cell division. That's just where cells are increasing in number. You're gonna have cell expansion, which is where these cells are going to get longer. Okay, remember we said with primary meristems, this is responsible for the tall growth of plants or the lengthening of plants. In order for something to get longer, something is going to have to basically elongate. So these cells are literally getting a little bit longer. Okay, and you also have a zone of cell differentiation, which is just another word for cell specialization. Okay, so remember we have specialized types of cells. Human bodies have specialized types of cells. For example, you may have a red blood cell, a white blood cell. Not every cell that you find inside an animal is going to be the exact same. Cells have, specific functions. The same thing with plants. Cells are going to be specialized after they're created. Okay, so for example, you have specialized cells. You have root hair cells that you would find inside roots. You have the palisade cells, you have, xylem cells, phloem cells, etc. Okay, so when it comes to these meristems here, it's going to have 3 different regions. One region is going to create new cells by doing cell division. Another region is going to help these cells to get a little bit longer. And then finally, another region is going to specialize these cells so that they'll have specific functions. For example, it may become a phloem cell, or it might become a palisade cell. It might become some type of bud that's growing to grow into a flower, etc. The cells are being specialized for different specific functions. Like I said, with the primary meristem, it's responsible for the lengthening of the plant. So as a tree gets taller, this is going to be the result of the primary meristem. Now, I don't want you guys to, confuse apical meristem with primary meristem because I guess I use them interchangeably, but they are basically the same thing. So it might be easier for you guys to remember primary meristem. But they're basically the same thing. The apical meristem is basically creating this primary meristem, okay? But with the apical meristem, the reason why it's called apical, because it comes from the word apex. And whenever you talk about apex, then you're talking about something being in a top position. So the apical meristem is literally found at the top of a shoot, okay? All right, so yeah, that's it for the primary meristem. So this is where, the lengthening of a plant is going to take place. Okay, so typically, the cells in this region, they're going to release some type of hormone called auxin. You might have recall, I guess, the purpose of auxin if you studied or learned about tropism before. Okay, so auxin is a hormone that is going to cause these cells to basically to grow. All right, the next type of meristem that we're going to talk about is called the secondary meristem. Okay, now with the secondary meristems, this type of tissue is found inside of the shoots and roots. Okay, so these cells are going to be responsible for the uh, increasing the width or the girth of a plant. It's also going to create vascular tissue inside of the stem, or I guess throughout the stem and the roots. Okay, so they're going to create xylem and the phloem. Now, when it comes to the secondary meristem, there are two important parts that you're going to have to remember. You have the cork cambium and the vascular cambium. Okay, so these are types of tissues that are examples of the secondary meristem. Now with the cork cambium, this is going to be responsible for creating bark, the bark of the tree. So this little line right here, if you want to think of these as layers, this outer layer right here is responsible for growing the outer layer of the tree or the plant, which is going to create some type of bark. So it's basically helping the plant to basically thicken. Okay, so this is why, as some plants grow, they're going to start off uh, green and very slender, but as time go on, they get thicker. And in the case of trees, there's going to be some type of bark on it that's going to give it that woody texture. So the cork cambium is going to be responsible for creating that bark. That is basically helping the tree to widen. Next, you have the vascular cambium. Okay, with the vascular cambium, as the name implies, this is going to help to create vascular tissue such as the xylem and the phloem. So the vascular cambium is going to be this layer here, and it's creating the vascular tissue. All right, so that different substances can flow throughout the plant. All right, so that being said, Uh, like I said, the secondary meristem is responsible for widening the plant or giving it a wider uh, circumference. Or you can also say increasing the girth of the plant. All right. One of the cambiums are going to be responsible for vascular tissue, which is going to create the xylem and the phloem, and one is going to be responsible for creating the bark. All right. So try to see if you can guess, which one is which. I guess you could pause the video. All right, so the right answer would have been that this this part right here is created by the cork cambium, okay, because that's going to create the bark or the outer layer of the tree that's gonna have this woody texture, and the vascular tissue, such as the xylem and the phloem, are going to be created by the vascular cambium. All right, so another thing that's important for you guys to know when it comes to which trees. All right, another interesting fact to know about growth in plants is that when it comes to secondary growth, that's going to be caused by the secondary meristem, that we associate with increasing the width or the girth of a plant. You're usually going to find this secondary growth occurring inside a lot of dicot plants. Okay, so for example, with mangoes, uh, dilly trees, those are going to be some examples. All right, so that's it for this video here. Next, we're gonna answer some questions. And I guess you can attempt to answer some of these questions. So if you don't want to, head answer right away, you could just pause the video, and then I'll also, answer each one of these so you can use that to practice. Okay, so with this first diagram here, this is showing a diagram of a plant. A diagram of a flower. Let's see what it asks. It asks you to name the different parts. Okay, so P is the stigma, Q is the anther, R is the petal. This is a weird diagram because it's showing half of the flower. U would have been the sepal, and T would have been the flower stalk. All right, name the type of cell division that occurs inside Q. All right, Q is pointing here. Now, we wouldn't have talked about this yet, but I plan to talk to you guys about it soon. But there's two types of cell division. You have mitosis and you have meiosis. Now, the easiest thing to remember about them is that with meiosis, this is the type of cell division that takes place in cells, well, inside sex cells. Okay, so sperm cells and egg cells, whatever cell division is used to basically create gamete cells, that's going to be caused by meiosis. Okay, so Q is the anther. This has pollen grains inside of it. Pollen grains are basically the sperm cells of plants. Okay, they have the male gamete inside of them. Okay, this is why we call the stamen the male part of the flower. All right, now with mitosis, you find that type of cell division taking place in just, I guess, all the other parts of the body. Okay, so basically inside somatic cells. These are cells that are not sex cells. So these are cells you find inside our muscle, our skin, etc. So with mitosis, a lot of the cell division that takes in mitosis are going to be associated with growth. Okay, so meiosis only takes place whenever a sex cell is involved. So that's the answer for Q right here, meiosis. B2, name the specialized cells produced in S. S is the ovary. The specialized type of cell you find inside them is called the ovules. Okay, these are egg cells. Give the letter of the structure that produces a substance that may become attached to visiting bees. They only ask for the letter, so that would be Q, and we know Q is the anther, but they just ask for the letter in this questionnaire. State the function of P. All right, P is the stigma. This is basically the part of the flower that's going to receive pollen grains so that pollination and so that pollination can occur, and that's going to lead on to fertilization. Okay, these are the petals of the plant, and their responsibility is to attract different insects towards the plant because of its smell or because of its visual or because of its color. All right, next question. All right, you may not be able to see this, but it says to explain the events which occur in flowers between pollination and fertilization. All right, so if you want to answer this question, just pause it here and I'll just, answer the question. All right, so the different events which occurs inside a flower between pollination and fertilization. We would have talked about this in our previous videos, but remember, I guess we'll start at pollination. Whenever a pollen grain lands on the stigma of a flower, a pollen tube is going to grow down this stigma and grow into the ovary. It's going to grow into the ovules, and it's going to enter the ovule through the micropyle. This pollen tube is carrying a male sex cell or a male gamete. All right, the nucleus from that is going to be released into the ovule, and then it's going to fuse with an egg cell, and that is going to create an embryo that will eventually grow into a seed. Okay. All right, next question. The diagram shows the external features of two plants. Which plant is a dicotyledon? All right, there's a couple of clues here that'll show you that. Okay, so we will know that B is a dicotyledon. It has a taproot. Okay, and it also has leaves, which has a main stem and has branching veins from it. Okay, and we know that diagram is a monocotyledon because it has narrow leaves and the root system is fibrous. List 3 observable features shown in the diagram to justify your answer. Okay, so you could use, whatever one of those features I just talked about, whether it's the top roots, where there's one main root and roots that branch off from that. Diagram A has a fibrous roots. Okay, so the roots just basically go off in all directions. Their leaves are going to look different. One has a branching vein system, one is narrow with parallel veins. Okay, moving on. On diagram A, draw a line to identify the structure which produces pollen grains and label it X. Okay, so here's diagram A. This is a corn plant. And with corn plants, it has a male part of the flower and a female part of the flower, but they're going to be separated. Okay, so it has male flowers, which you'll call the tassel. That's this top region of the flower here. So this is where the pollen grains are going to be created. And it has a female flower called the air. Okay, so this is with the corn plant, you'll basically find a lot of silk that comes out of these airs. And eventually that is the part that is going to grow into a corn. Okay, so this is why, if you ever buy a fresh corn on the cob, you'll still see some of that silk that's out of the air. So that's basically the stigma of the, I guess, the old female flower before it would have turned into a corn. Okay, so the corn, uh, the kernels on the corn, that would be, what would have used to been the ovules, and the corn cob, I guess that would be the ovary. All right, but going back to my question here, this section here, you would draw a line here and then you would put X because this is where the pollen grains are going to be created. Name the agent involved in the transfer of the pollen grains in plant A. Okay, so the main way that the main way that corn plants are going to pollinate themselves is through wind pollination. Okay, so that's why this plant is designed this way. The the anthers are found at the very top of the plant so that whenever the wind blows, it can blow pollen grain. The stigma has all these silk that basically are flowing in the air so that whenever a pollen grain lands on the silk, that's going to basically cause pollination to occur, and then that's going to lead on to fertilization. Explain how the roots of both plants are similar in function. Well, that's easy. You just have to say what a root is used for. It's going to anchor the plants into the soil, it's going to absorb water, and it's also going to absorb minerals. List two ways in which maize is used in the Bahamas. Maize is the scientific name of corn. All right, two ways we use corn. You have grits. We use it as a food source, and corn is also used to create a sweetener. Okay, so whenever you look at the back of most food items, you'll find that a common ingredient is high fructose corn syrup, which is the sweetener. So that's another use of corn. We use it as a sweetener, and we also use it as a food source, such as grits. All right, moving on to this question here. Explain the importance of flowers to a plant. All right, I'll give you some time to attempt to answer that by yourself. You can pause the video. All right, so the reason why flowers are important, we notice the sexual reproductive organ of a flower. Okay, so this is how a flower is going to basically, create an offspring. That's going to be the main benefit of flowers to plants. Okay, in addition to it helping it, I guess, do reproduction, once this flower is fertilized, it's going to turn into a fruit, and that's going to help with seed dispersal. Okay, so it's basically helping this plant to reproduce and create seeds. And once it turns into a fruit, it's going to help that plant to basically disperse these seeds, in different areas to prevent overcrowding. All right, state the function of structure R. Notice it says state the function of structure R. It doesn't says, what structure R is, but structure R, that's the anther. Its function is to create pollen grains. All right, C, name the structure it developed from the parts labeled X and Y. We know X is the ovary that's going to become the fruit. Y are the ovules, they're going to become the seed. What is germination? Germination is the process of a seed turning into a seedling. Or you can say, the process of a seed growing into a plant. All right. Next, it says state two environmental factors which are necessary for seeds to germinate. All right. I gave you guys three. It needs oxygen, it needs water, or you can say a moist soil, and it also is going to need a suitable temperature range between 5 degrees Celsius and 40 degrees Celsius. All right, here's the last question. Suggest two advantages to a germinating seed of having its radical grow out first before its plumule. Okay, so here are two advantages. The first one is remember that this seed is going to need access to water. Okay, so if the roots grow out first and grow more, I guess, rootlets, that's going to increase its supply to water because it's going to make it easier for the seed to absorb water. Another advantage is that this seedling is going to basically anchor, sorry, the roots are basically going to start anchoring this plant into the soil so that it can get a, I guess, position itself firmly into the soil. And now the shoots will be able to grow. Okay, because you wouldn't want the shoot to grow first. And then I guess the plant just collapse on the ground because it has no foundation in the soil. Okay, so two advantages. One, you have it allows the plant to absorb water more efficiently, and you also have that it's going to help to secure the plant into the soil. It's going to fix it firmly into the soil so that the other parts of the plant can grow without the plant, basically toppling over. All right, so that's it for this video here. If you have any questions, you could just contact me and I'll give you guys advice.